The Chief General of the U.S. Armed Forces, Elijah Brooks, is a black man in his 50s, known and respected for his exemplary discipline, unwavering integrity, and exceptional career in the military. Over several decades of service, Elijah has climbed every rank through a rare combination of discipline, strategic competence, and absolute dedication to his duty. His uniform is adorned with prestigious military distinctions, attesting to his courage and many contributions on the field, especially in peace missions and delicate operations abroad. But beyond the discipline and sharp gaze that naturally command respect, Elijah is appreciated by his colleagues and subordinates for his kindness and the unwavering support he provides his teams, whom he considers a second family. Married for over 20 years and the father of 2 children, Elijah chose to settle his family in an upscale, predominantly white residential neighborhood. Although his status commands respect, his presence in this neighborhood arouses a certain curiosity tinged with admiration and reserve. Most of his neighbors, impressed by his aura and background, do not always dare to approach him, perceiving him as an imposing figure, almost intimidating, whose stoic demeanor and military stature rarely leave room for familiarity. For some, he is a source of inspiration, a model of success and resilience. For others, he remains a mystery they are hesitant to unravel. Despite these unspoken barriers, Elijah strives to break the distance, becoming involved in his community with a sense of duty that goes far beyond his military commitment. He regularly participates in local charity work, particularly those dedicated to military families and veterans, and does not hesitate to offer his time and resources to causes that are close to his heart. His children, whom he raises with values of discipline, respect, and integrity, grow up with the example of a deeply committed yet attentive and present father. In the intimacy of his home, Elijah reveals a softer and more affectionate side, far from the image of the strict and inflexible general. With his children, he takes the time to share moments of complicity, mixing life lessons with laughter, reminding them of the importance of persevering despite obstacles and always being proud of their roots. To his wife, he is a caring partner, aware of the sacrifices their family life demands because of his professional responsibilities. She is his anchor, the one who helps him maintain balance in the face of the constant challenges of his position, and it is from her that he draws the strength needed to face the pressures and solitude that come with his role and rank. The Brooks home, though marked by the rigor of military routine, is filled with warmth and simplicity that contrast with Elijah's imposing status. In the eyes of those who truly know him, he is not just a general with countless medals and responsibilities. He is a humble and just man, who places dignity and respect for others at the heart of his existence. One evening, while the residential neighborhood is bathed in an apparent calm, the local police captain, Brad Collins, receives a call reporting suspicious activity in the area. The complaint, vague and lacking concrete details, nevertheless catches Collins' attention, even though he knows full well that a simple gathering of neighbors does not constitute a threat. But for him, this call represents much more than just a request for surveillance. He sees it as an opportunity to assert himself and remind everyone of his authority, especially in an affluent neighborhood where interventions are rare. This call actually comes from one of Elijah Brooks' neighbors, a respected Army general, who is one of the few black residents in this upscale neighborhood. Not used to seeing much activity around Elijah's house and uncomfortable with what he perceives as an intrusion into his environment, this neighbor did not hesitate to alert the authorities. For him, a group of guests, even well-dressed and arriving discreetly, seems out of place, as if the very idea of a black man hosting a gathering in this normally quiet neighborhood arouses suspicion. On his side, Elijah Brooks, an accomplished general and man of values, organized this gathering with the intention of celebrating a moment of relaxation with friends and colleagues who, like him, have served the country with loyalty and courage. After years of dedication and personal sacrifices, he wanted to share an evening of reunion and camaraderie, surrounded by trusted friends and high-ranking military officers, all coming together to mark this well-deserved break in an informal setting. But unbeknownst to Elijah and his guests, this seemingly harmless gathering quickly becomes the center of an unexpected police intervention. Collins, determined to demonstrate vigilance, heads to the scene with a stance of an unyielding guardian. As he approaches the general's home, he indulges in imagining scenarios fueled by his own preconceived ideas, in which this gathering might conceal a form of disorder or threat to the tranquility of the neighborhood. In his mind, the idea that a black man could live in this house and host guests there with full legitimacy seems strange, almost inconceivable, and he already pictures himself as the protector of the area, ready to restore order if necessary. Brad Collins, fully intent on playing the guardian of order, is swept up by his sense of superiority and need for control. In his mind, he is convinced that his presence is not only justified but necessary to maintain order in this upscale neighborhood, which he considers his territory. On his way, he feeds his biases by imagining all sorts of improbable scenarios about what might unfold behind the walls of Elijah's home. The idea that a black man, even an army general, could host a gathering in such a prestigious neighborhood seems suspicious to him, an anomaly he is ready to correct on his own. Arriving on Elijah's street, Collins deliberately chooses not to be discreet. Instead, he stops in front of the house, letting the headlights of his vehicle harshly illuminate the well-maintained garden and lit windows, breaking the evening's calm. The cold, aggressive glow of the headlights seeps inside, catching the attention of the guests, who exchange surprised and puzzled looks. For many of them, the arrival of a uniformed police officer in the middle of the evening is both a surprise and a provocation. Collins steps out of his vehicle with a defiant air, ostentatiously adjusting his uniform to emphasize his presence, as if trying to be noticed or even intimidate. He strides toward the front door with heavy, purposeful steps, not even bothering to announce his arrival. His gait and stern expression betray his intention to remind everyone who, in his view, holds the authority in this neighborhood. Ignoring the rules of politeness and respect, he knocks on the door with marked insistence, a gesture closer to a command than a courteous greeting. Inside, the party comes to an abrupt, tense silence. The guests, among whom are several high-ranking military officers who have fought alongside Elijah, look around, trying to guess the reason for such an intervention. General Elijah Brooks, calm but inwardly irritated by Collins' attitude, walks toward the door with controlled steps. Upon opening it, he finds himself facing the police captain, who gives him a scrutinizing look, filled with visible distrust, signaling through his demeanor that this gathering seems unnatural to him. Collins lingers, his gaze scanning the entryway, inspecting every detail and every guest as if he were there to search for any irregularities. He addresses Elijah in a cold, condescending tone, asking about the nature of the event, and subtly suggesting that such a gathering could pose a problem for the maintenance of neighborhood tranquility. Ignoring the inappropriateness of his words, he seems to relish the effect of his imposed presence. The guests, aware of the implicit message behind this visit, exchange looks between Elijah and Collins, some displaying expressions of dismay, others holding back anger. Elijah, though accustomed to tension and discipline, takes a deep breath to contain his frustration. He responds to Collins with calm and politeness, briefly explaining the purpose of the gathering. But the officer seems determined to press on. Ignoring Elijah's rank and stature, Collins continues to ask intrusive questions, even going so far as to observe the other guests with a suspicious eye, as if to suggest that their presence here is, in his view, both suspicious and out of place. Collins, with no real justification for prolonging his presence, adopts an inquisitive posture, asking direct and invasive questions with an assurance bordering on arrogance. "What is the purpose of this event? How many people are here?" he inquires, inspecting the room with a look that betrays mistrust and superiority. Each question resonates like a disguised accusation, as though this were a search rather than a simple check. The informal nature of the gathering among close friends is obvious, but that does not prevent the captain from scrutinizing each guest insistently, almost demanding that everyone justify their presence, as if he were looking for an irregularity where there is none. Despite the absurdity and injustice of the situation, Elijah maintains admirable composure. Though his gestures and gaze reveal the tension he is holding back, he answers Collins' questions with unwavering politeness, as if to emphasize the gap between their respective statuses. Behind each calm response, Elijah reveals an inner frustration, aware that this unnecessary control is not part of a legitimate security procedure but a deliberate attempt to challenge his place in this neighborhood. His bearing and dignity serve as armor against this inexplicable hostility. Collins, for his part, unable to mask his hostility, makes a few insinuating comments. "An unusual gathering, for this neighborhood, isn't it?" he murmurs, casting disdainful glances around the room. His barely veiled words reveal his obvious discomfort at the sight of a group of influential and respected people, of various backgrounds, united by their military experience and friendship with Elijah. He struggles to accept the legitimacy of this gathering in a space he deep down considers reserved for a certain elite he cannot associate with Elijah and his guests. The guests, though silent, are clearly irritated and exchange heavy glances full of unspoken meaning. The atmosphere grows tense, each person realizing that Colin's control is not driven by the need for security, but by a latent desire to remind Elijah that, in his mind, he remains an intruder in this privileged neighborhood. Some murmur quietly, expressing their indignation and confusion at such an unjust treatment. As discomfort builds, a few neighbors approach, drawn by the unusual commotion. They watch the scene discreetly from their gardens and driveways, exchanging awkward glances. Despite Elijah's clear explanations and the presentation of his official papers, Captain Collins persists in his suspicious attitude, as if every word Elijah speaks only strengthens his own prejudices. In his mind, the image of a black man living in such a prestigious house, surrounded by influential colleagues, seems to challenge all his certainties, and he cannot conceal his growing skepticism. Ignoring the obvious signs of authority and distinction Elijah displays, Collins continues to question his identity, this time with a barely concealed condescending tone. "It's unusual, isn't it, to see such a property in hands like yours?" he says, insidiously. His words, though ambiguous, are heavy with subtext, revealing the contempt he is trying to disguise under a facade of professionalism. Elijah's guests exchange indignant looks, some clenching their fists, outraged by this blatant insult. They can see that, behind Colin's apparent confidence, lies discomfort mingled with jealousy and deeply ingrained prejudice, as if he cannot accept the success of this man, whom he considers, without even knowing him, as an intruder in his own neighborhood. Elijah, for his part, takes a deep breath, absorbing the affront without giving in to anger. His gaze fixed, he remains unshaken, despite the passive aggression in the captain's words. Standing tall, he faces this man, whose contempt is evident in every syllable, as if silently reminding him that his journey, sacrifices, and achievements cannot be denied by mere racist insinuations. The scene is almost theatrical, a silent battle where dignity and prejudice clash without a word too many. Collins, far from being intimidated, lets his confusion spill over. How could a man like Elijah, from a community he stereotypes, have reached such a social status? "Tell me, General, isn't it a bit excessive to claim such a residence? I mean, all of this is far beyond what one would expect, isn't it?" he continues, his tone growing increasingly provocative, as if testing Elijah's patience. Elijah, initially indignant at the implicit insult in Collins' attitude, takes a deep breath, just as he has many times in the field to face moments of extreme tension. The piercing gaze he fixes on the captain speaks volumes about the discipline and resilience he has cultivated over decades of military service. His face, though marked by irritation, remains impassive, every line of his expression carefully controlled to not yield a single bit of dignity in the face of this affront. In a firm and measured voice, he responds to Collins, weighing each word carefully, fully aware of the weight of his statement. "Captain, I am General Elijah Brooks, Commander-in-Chief of the United States Armed Forces." These words, spoken with calm authority, resonate in the room, imposing a heavy silence around them. Elijah then extends his identification papers, accompanied by his official military badge, a precious and symbolic item reserved for the highest-ranking officers. The badge, with its sleek lines and gleaming metal, represents commitment, sacrifice, and loyalty, values to which Elijah has dedicated his life. Collins, staring at the insignia, cannot ignore that he is facing a man of a stature he cannot easily dismiss or belittle. The quiet authority that emanates from Elijah seems to unsettle Collins, even though he tries to mask his discomfort with a cold, arrogant expression. But something in Elijah's posture, his unshakable confidence, begins to crack the captain's haughty attitude. The guests, meanwhile, watch in silence, moved and impressed by Elijah's restraint despite the immense pressure on him. They all know that this man, who could easily remind the captain of his place, chooses to respond with respect and self-control. Elijah's gaze, fixed squarely into Collins' eyes, seems to issue a silent challenge. Through his posture and words, he reminds Collins that the uniform he wears, even without its rank insignia, was earned through hard work, countless sacrifices, and unwavering will. There is no doubt that the authority he claims here is that of a leader, a man of courage who has never allowed the color of his skin to dictate his fate or abilities. However, Collins, rather than calming the situation, seems driven by a growing resentment. He averts his gaze for a moment, but too proud to admit his mistake or prejudice, he persists in his obstinacy. Elijah remains calm, knowing that any impulsive gesture or angry reaction could be seen as a weakness. His self-control, a quality forged in the heart of the most intense situations, pushes him to wait patiently for the captain to come to terms with the truth. He is in the presence not only of a high-ranking officer but of a man of value who deserves respect far more than suspicion. Collins, insensitive to the evidence and blind to Elijah's dignity, seems consumed by an obsession to assert his authority. The idea of facing a black man so influential and respected seems to stir a form of defiance in him that he cannot suppress. Refusing to see Elijah as a legitimate resident of the neighborhood, he decides to push the humiliation even further. Seizing his status as captain, Collins declares in a sharp tone that a complete inspection of the premises is necessary to ensure the neighborhood's safety. Without even asking Elijah for permission, Collins enters the house, inspecting each room with a scrutinizing and suspicious gaze, as if searching for evidence of some illicit activity. His movements are slow and deliberate, and he takes care to be as intrusive as possible, opening doors, inspecting furniture, and examining every corner with exaggerated zeal. This scene feels like a parody of a security inspection, but under this pretense, Collins is primarily trying to demonstrate his power and place Elijah in an inferior position. Elijah's guests, also high-ranking military and civilian figures, witness this intrusion with a mix of consternation and indignation. Several of them exchange looks, shocked and outraged, unable to understand how such a situation could occur in this supposedly quiet neighborhood. One of the guests, a respected colonel who served alongside Elijah, attempts to intervene to stop this humiliating search. He steps forward, but Elijah, with a calm and firm glance, stops him. He seems determined to confront Collins alone, not wanting to give the impression that he has anything to hide, even though the captain's arrogance and lack of respect deeply disturb him internally. Collins continues his inspection with deliberate slowness, moving through the living room, the kitchen, and every corner of the house as though it were a crime scene. He opens drawers, brushes against decorative objects, and even inspects the bookshelves, searching in vain for a clue that could justify his presence. This invasion of Elijah's privacy, under the stunned gaze of his colleagues and friends, increasingly feels like a psychological power play rather than a genuine security measure. Elijah, the master of himself, lets nothing show of his annoyance. His posture remains upright and imposing, his eyes fixed on Collins, silently reminding him of his position and honor. For Elijah, every second of this scene is another test of patience, but also a means to prove to everyone that he can endure this humiliation without being brought down. He knows that any sign of weakness or anger could be used against him, and he refuses to offer Collins that satisfaction. As Collins finishes his inspection, he suddenly stops in the living room, near an elegantly carved wooden table, upon which rests an antique lamp with intricate details. The guests, scattered around the room, are still whispering quietly, but the general attention shifts instinctively toward Collins, whose precise and calculated movements betray a dark intent. Collins slides his fingers into the inside pocket of his jacket, the gesture imperceptible to the untrained eye, and discreetly pulls out a small packet of white powder. He holds it for a moment between his fingers, scanning the room to ensure no one notices his actions. Then, in a swift and expert movement, he slips the packet under the lamp, just visible enough to create the illusion that he found it there, hidden carelessly. Raising his head with a falsely surprised expression, he lets out a theatrical sigh, drawing everyone's attention. His deep, accusatory voice resonates with a calculated intonation as he exclaims, exaggerating his shock. "Elijah, this doesn't look like just a decoration. What are you doing with this substance here?" Collins' tone is full of feigned indignation, and he lets his gaze linger heavily on Elijah, hoping to sow doubt and suspicion among the guests. The room falls into a troubled silence, everyone exchanging shocked and uncertain looks, visibly stunned by this sudden discovery. Some guests, once certain of Elijah's integrity, seem unsettled, while others begin to sense the manipulation at play. Faced with this scandalous situation, Elijah feels a wave of indignation surge within him. However, he takes a deep breath, struggling to control the storm of anger threatening to erupt. The accusation is as cruel as it is unjust, but Elijah refuses to be dominated by rage. He understands that giving in to emotion would be giving Collins the victory he seems to crave so much. His eyes fixed on Collins, Elijah maintains an impassive mask, dignifiedly challenging the trap laid for him. In silence, he vows not to let this treachery go unanswered, aware that the truth always prevails, even in the darkest of times. Collins, satisfied with his scheme and the discomfort he has sowed in the room, decides to deliver a final dramatic twist. He lets his fingers graze the handcuffs attached to his belt, slowly pulling them out so that everyone in the room understands the gravity of the scene he is orchestrating. The slight clinking of the metal draws all eyes to him, plunging the room into tense silence, only broken by a few murmurs from guests visibly confused by the turn of events. "I have no other choice," Collins declares with false solemnity, as though performing a tragic yet necessary duty. "Elijah, I am placing you under arrest for drug trafficking." This statement resonates in the room like an explosion. The guests freeze, stunned, their eyes flickering between Collins and Elijah, their disbelief laced with shock and indignation. Some attempt to exchange quiet whispers, muttering comments under their breath, unable to believe that a man like Elijah, known for his integrity and discretion, could be involved in such a matter. Others, hesitant and skeptical, watch Collins with growing suspicion, sensing a hint of malice in his demeanor. Collins, determined to finish what he started, steps toward Elijah with a barely concealed smile of satisfaction. He grabs Elijah's wrists firmly, his movements filled with controlled brutality. The coldness of the handcuffs against Elijah's skin is an additional affront, an insult to his dignity. The scene plays out in slow motion for Elijah, who feels every gaze weigh on him like a silent condemnation, each second stretching out into a public humiliation that tightens around his chest. Despite the anger and indignation coursing through him, he keeps his face impassive, forcing himself to control the tide of resentment threatening to overwhelm him. The room, once filled with a warm atmosphere of camaraderie, is now steeped in stifling tension. Some guests, caught in indecision, try to understand Collins' motivations, while others retreat into a silent fear, as if they were witnessing a scene best left unspoken. A few step closer cautiously, to get a better view, captivated by what they perceive as an unexpected drama unfolding in the heart of the evening. Elijah, feeling the weight of the injustice fall upon him, keeps his eyes fixed ahead, refusing to give in to the panic or anger that could compromise his dignity. Deep down, he knows that any reaction, any outburst, would be seen as an admission of guilt. He breathes deeply, pushing aside the whirlwind of emotions overtaking him, aware that Collins only seeks to push him to his limits in order to solidify his own power. As he stands handcuffed, Elijah casts a calm and penetrating gaze at Collins, a flame of determination and defiance shining in his eyes. He knows that this battle doesn't end here, and that he will now need to marshal all his resources to overturn the accusation against him. While Collins parades around the room, savoring his small triumph, Elijah silently vows to prove his innocence and expose the injustice he's suffering. The guests, increasingly uncomfortable, begin to murmur openly, some even daring to express their doubts about the integrity of Collins' discovery. Doubt and suspicion begin to circulate, and a sense of general unease settles in the room, gradually stifling the sense of solidarity with Collins that he had hoped to provoke. The scene, though heartbreaking, marks the beginning of a silent resistance in favor of Elijah, and many of the guests begin to see the veil of manipulation behind Collins' mask. Collins, intoxicated by his dramatic turn and the discomfort he has skillfully orchestrated, decides to see his humiliating performance through to the end. With an authoritative gesture, he drags Elijah out of the living room, under the stunned and outraged gazes of the guests, some of whom are beginning to realize the blatant cruelty of this arrest. The heavy silence that had settled in the room now gives way to a murmur of confusion and protest, a wave of disapproval spreading among the guests. Indifferent to the accusing looks from some, Collins leads Elijah outside, where a patrol car is waiting. Collins' stride is that of a man thirsty for power, savoring every moment of this charade. He pushes Elijah roughly into the vehicle, forcing him to sit in the back, handcuffed and defenseless. The door slams shut, and Collins takes his place in the front, casting a satisfied glance in the rearview mirror, as if to confirm the forced submission of the one he has unjustly accused. The ride to the police station is silent, but the tension between the two men is almost palpable. Elijah, despite the humiliating situation, refuses to show any weakness. His fixed gaze, filled with calm and determination, is set on the horizon, as though drawing strength from that distance to shield himself from the humiliation he has endured. Collins, on the other hand, tries to provoke Elijah, casting contemptuous glances through the rearview mirror, hoping for a reaction that would confirm his unfounded accusations. Upon their arrival at the station, Collins pulls Elijah out of the car and leads him inside, in front of a few officers who watch the scene with surprise. Some exchange puzzled looks, astonished to see Elijah, a man known in the community for his integrity, handcuffed and dragged in like a high-profile criminal. Collins, determined to assert his authority and impress his colleagues, declares with emphasis, "Here is a new suspect for drug trafficking. This is what he was hiding at home, well concealed under a lamp. Who knows how long he's been leading this double life?" Elijah, though inwardly outraged, remains stoically silent. He knows that his words would be in vain in this context, where Collins' accusation seems to weigh more heavily than his own defense. His dignity and integrity shine through despite the handcuffs around his wrists, and some officers begin to question, intrigued by the calm he displays despite the severity of the accusations. As he is placed in a holding cell, Collins' words continue to echo in the minds of the officers present, as well as in Elijah's own mind, who silently vows, despite the oppressive situation, not to let this injustice crush him. As the door to the cell slams shut behind him, Elijah feels a flame of resilience intensifying within him, an inner strength that he is certain will help him prove his innocence and bring the truth to light. Days pass, and Elijah, still imprisoned, awaits his trial with a mix of impatience and frustration. When he is finally led to court, a heavy and tense atmosphere fills the courtroom. The benches are filled with journalists, curious guests, and community members, all eager to learn the outcome of what promises to be a sensational case. Elijah enters the room, handcuffed, but his posture is straight, his gaze resolute. He refuses to let shame or humiliation show on his face. Whispers ripple through the room as he crosses the space, a solitary figure amidst the crowd. People exchange perplexed looks, some wondering how a man so respected could find himself in this position. Collins, on the other hand, stands proudly at the front, exuding arrogant confidence, convinced that his scheme will prove successful. The judge, a woman in her 50s with a piercing gaze, takes her seat on the bench and bangs her gavel to call the court to order. The room falls silent, and a palpable tension settles in. Elijah takes his place in the defendant's seat, his heart pounding, but he focuses on the strength of his convictions. The prosecutor, a strict and austere man, begins to lay out the charges, citing the evidence presented by Collins and describing the scene of the drug packet discovery. Despite the gravity of the accusations, Elijah listens with calm attention, analyzing every word spoken. The prosecutor's statements seem more and more disconnected from the reality he himself knows. He feels a new determination awaken within him, the resolve not to be silenced by this injustice. When it is his turn to speak, Elijah slowly rises, his wrists still marked by the handcuffs. He takes a deep breath, gathering the courage to defend his honor. All eyes are on him, some full of sympathy, others filled with doubt. "Your Honor, ladies and gentlemen of the jury," he begins, his voice firm but respectful. "I am here today not only to defend my freedom but also to restore my dignity, which has been trampled upon by unfounded accusations." He pauses, scanning the room to capture everyone's attention. "I am not a criminal. This drug packet was never mine. Collins orchestrated this situation solely to humiliate me and take advantage of his position of authority. I have always been a respected member of my community, and I refuse to let this false accusation define who I am. A murmur ripples through the room. Some jury members exchange puzzled looks, while Collins clenches his fists, visibly irritated by the turn of events. Elijah continues, his voice growing more passionate, more sincere. I implore each of you to look beyond appearances, to consider the truth hidden behind this farce. I am here to prove my innocence, not only for myself but for everyone who, like me, has been the victim of prejudice and abuse of power. I ask for a chance to have my voice heard, to show that justice must prevail over manipulation and malice. The room falls silent as Elijah finishes his speech, his determined gaze fixed on the judge and the jury. He knows that every word he has spoken could carry weight, and he hopes that the truth will ultimately prevail. His dignity, despite the handcuffs and the accusation, is a weapon he wields with pride. After Elijah's impassioned address, the judge, visibly impressed by his defense, furrows her brow as she examines the documents presented to her. She looks up, scanning the assembly with a determined gaze, and declares clearly, I believe it is imperative to conduct a swift and thorough investigation into this matter. The charges against the defendant are serious, and it is essential that we have all the necessary information to make an informed decision. The murmurs in the room intensify as jury members exchange looks, some seeming relieved, others more skeptical. Collins, surprised by the turn of events, tries to maintain his composure, but anxiety begins to show on his face. The judge continues, calling upon a police detective present in the courtroom. I want you to conduct a rapid investigation into the circumstances surrounding the discovery of this drug packet. This includes reviewing the video footage from Elijah's property and interviewing all witnesses who were present during this incident. She turns to the prosecutor, her voice growing firmer. Make sure all evidence is examined thoroughly and impartially. I want results before the next hearing, which will be scheduled as soon as possible. The judge bangs her gavel, marking the end of the session for the day. Jury members begin to rise, still in shock from this unexpected decision. Elijah, though still handcuffed, feels a breath of relief. The possibility of a thorough investigation gives him new hope. As spectators begin to leave the room, Elijah turns to his lawyer, who smiles encouragingly at him. Elijah's gaze reflects renewed determination. He knows the road to truth is fraught with obstacles, but he is ready to fight to the end. Outside, journalists rush to interview the people present, seeking statements about the accusation and the judge's decision. Elijah, though handcuffed, is surrounded by a group of supporters who are amazed by the turn of events and hope that the truth will finally come to light. As he is escorted to the police car to be returned to his cell, Elijah cannot help but feel a slight sense of relief. An investigation is underway, and perhaps, just perhaps, justice will prevail in this grotesque case. The wheels of truth are starting to turn, and he is determined to do whatever it takes to prove his innocence. The day of the second hearing arrives, and an atmosphere of anticipation fills the courtroom. Elijah, still handcuffed but more composed, enters the room, his mind sharp and resolute. The seats are filled with spectators, some friends and family members, while others are journalists eager for information about the sensational case. The judge takes her seat, and the murmur of the crowd slowly fades. The prosecutor, with a serious expression, rises to report on the investigation ordered. He begins by stating that the video footage from Elijah's property has been reviewed, as well as the testimonies of several guests who were present when the drug packet was discovered. Your Honor, he begins, the investigation has revealed troubling facts. The videos show that the drug packet was placed under the lamp by Officer Collins, and was not discovered by Elijah. Additionally, several witnesses have confirmed that the defendant was never in possession of this substance. The murmurs intensify in the room, and the faces of some jury members tense up, surprised by these unexpected revelations. Elijah feels a mix of relief and determination. He knows that this truth is crucial to proving his innocence. The judge, in a firm tone, asks the prosecutor to continue. Do you have any other evidence or witnesses to present? The prosecutor nods and calls a key witness, one of the guests present during the incident. The man steps forward, hesitant but determined. Once on the stand, he turns to the judge and declares, "I can attest that I saw Collins place the packet under the lamp. At first, I thought it was a joke, but after seeing what happened next, I realized it was much more serious." Silence falls in the room, and the judge notes every word with great attention. Elijah, his heart racing, realizes that the tide is beginning to turn in his favor. Collins, for his part, pales under the revelations. His initial arrogance fades, replaced by palpable nervousness. The judge gives him a piercing look, her patience visibly tested. "Officer Collins," she says in a firm voice, "do you have anything to say in response to these serious accusations?" Collins's gaze darkens as he tries to justify himself. I didn't do anything wrong. It was just a simple misjudgment." His voice shakes slightly, betraying the panic taking hold of him. The judge does not seem convinced by his response. It appears that this investigation has uncovered not only an error but potentially misconduct. "I will order an additional investigation into Officer Collins's behavior during this incident." The murmurs in the room grow into a buzz of speculation and rumors, and Elijah's gaze shines with hope. He feels that the truth is beginning to triumph, and his dignity is starting to be restored. As the session continues, the judge takes a moment to reflect, her gaze lost in the scattered documents in front of her. The atmosphere in the room is charged with anticipation. The murmurs have died down, and all eyes are on her. Finally, she looks up, a glimmer of determination in her eyes. "Pending the outcome of this additional investigation, I will lift the charges against the defendant, Elijah. The evidence presented today, particularly the eyewitness testimonies and the video recordings, reveal a deeply concerning situation." A collective sigh of relief escapes Elijah and his loved ones. For the first time, he feels recognized in his quest for justice. The judge continues, her firm voice resonating in the room. "However, regarding Officer Collins, I cannot ignore the serious allegations against him. His conduct and the abuse of his power as a law enforcement officer are unacceptable. Therefore, I will order that the case against Collins be transferred to a specialized court, where he will have to answer for his actions." Murmurs resume, mixed with both dismay and approval. Elijah watches Collins, whose pale face betrays growing panic. The judge continues, not giving him a moment's respite. "This situation must not be taken lightly. Abuse of power and false accusations must not go unpunished. I urge the competent authorities to closely examine his conduct and take the necessary measures." Applause breaks out in the room, and some members of the jury exchange approving glances. Elijah, his eyes misted with tears of gratitude, turns to his lawyer, who smiles at him proudly. He knows that this victory is the result of a fierce battle, not only for himself but for all those who have suffered similar injustices. The judge, concluding, adds, "I want everyone to understand the importance of truth and justice. We must fight for a system that protects all its citizens, regardless of their background." As the session concludes, Elijah leaves the courthouse with a sense of lightness. Although still marked by the experience, he knows that this step is crucial for his rehabilitation and for the justice of all those who have been unjustly accused. As he exits, he is greeted by friends and family members who embrace him, and he feels their unwavering support. The future remains uncertain, but for the first time in a long time, he feels ready to face whatever comes. His dignity restored, he turns toward a new chapter of his life, confident that the truth will always come to light in the end.